At this hour, the President of the United States is aboard Air Force One. He is taking off in the air on his first trip overseas since taking office. The President and the First Lady, Melania Trump, departed earlier from Joint Base Andrews. They are heading first to Saudi Arabia. From there, it is Israel, then Rome and the Vatican, then Belgium, followed by Sicily. But controversy continues to follow the President. We do have some breaking news to get to. The Washington Post reports a current White House staffer is a significant person of interest in the criminal investigation into possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign. The person is described as being close to the president. Also this afternoon, the New York Times has new details on the Oval Office meeting between the president and top Russian diplomats that took place a day after then FBI Director James Comey was fired. According to the Times, in that meeting, the president said, quote, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That is taken off." CBS News political director Steve Chaggaris is in our Washington bureau now. Steve, good to see you. Let's start first with the Post report, which would seem to advance this story.
Yeah, no question. So, initially the investigators have been looking at Trump campaign officials that had contact with Russian officials, and that's really sort of where the focus was. Trump campaign originally had denied that was the case. We're learning, obviously, that that's not necessarily the case, that there have been contact. Now, what the Post is reporting is that there's somebody inside the White House who's currently on the White House staff, a senior advisor, who is a, quote, significant person of interest. Now, what that means, we don't know definitively. What we do know, though, is that they would likely want to ask this person questions about what contact they had, what exactly they spoke to Russian officials about. But it takes it in a different direction. Again, we were hearing that there's no contact at all. Now they're saying there's definitely no collusion between people in the Trump campaign. Well, now we're getting into the White House here, and so we're all trying to figure out who this person of interest might be. We do know there are a few people that are currently members of the administration that did have contact with Russian officials. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. We know that Attorney General Jeff Sessions did as well, and we know that Trump's son-in-law, who's a senior advisor, Jared Kushner, had contact. This was all during prior to Trump's inauguration. So again, the advancing of the story here is now they want to talk to somebody and really interrogate somebody who is currently working in the White House about the Russia connections.
But one of the points here, Steve, is that those are the people who had acknowledged contact so far.
Sure, and there could be people that we don't know about yet, right? And if that's the case, that would be another bombshell. But this Post report doesn't identify who the person of interest is, whether it's somebody we've known to have contacts with Russian officials or whether it's somebody we previously didn't know. And if that's the case, then we're talking, again, another advancing of the story, but we're not there yet. And
so if we talk about just and many folks could potentially be involved with the Post is just saying there's this one person of interest that is close to the president. In terms of the three who have acknowledged that contact, Jeff Sessions and Jared Kushner were obviously involved in the campaign. Rex Tillerson was not.
Right, correct. Rex Tillerson was Exxon CEO. He had had dealings with Vladimir Putin and Russian officials, and that was the extent of his connection to Russian officials. But those are the three that we know about who are currently serving the administration. Now, of course, there was also Michael Flynn, who was a member of the administration briefly and lost his job over all of this. And he's been really the focus of this investigation so far. The fact that now they found another person of interest who's currently in the administration, again, advances this story to somewhere where it hasn't been previously.
And by naming or by leaking out this information that that this is a person of interest, that obviously this is someone whose name one would suspect they would like to get out there because they want to speak with them at some point very soon. Let's talk about the Times report then as well. Maybe not as significant as far as the investigation goes, but certainly some interesting color from inside that Oval Office meeting, and that is the president calling James Comey, according to the Times, a real nut job.
Yeah, I mean, let's just remember how this whole thing unfolded. So the day before that meeting was the day that President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. The official word out of the White House was that it was because of the recommendation of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who had put together a memo suggesting that Comey wasn't doing his job very well. And that was really what they sort of hung their hat on as the reasoning for Comey's departure. Then 2 days later, the day after this meeting with the Russian officials, Trump was on network television doing an interview and saying, yeah, no, I had the Russia investigation on my mind when I was thinking about firing him. And I was thinking, by the way, about firing him before I saw Rosenstein's memos. So that the story changed. Now we're getting, well, then again, Trump this week then said, no, it was Rosenstein's memo that was the impetus for me firing him. Now the story changes again. We're getting in this timeline in the middle, Trump telling these the Russian ambassador and the Russian foreign minister to their faces that the reason why he did it was basically because he thought Comey was, quote, a nut job. So again, going back to the Russia reason as to why he why he fired Comey. Again, very curious. We have not gotten a straight answer from this White House nor the president on the real reasoning behind this, but this offers a little I think a little bit more of an indication of what was going on in the president's head. If he's telling foreign leaders that the reason why he did it was because he didn't like James Comey, and not only just telling any foreign leaders, but telling the foreign minister from Russia, the country that is being investigated by the FBI that James Comey was overseeing.
Right, and the explanations have been all over the place, but one thing the president has been, or at least tried to be consistent on, is claiming that he's not under any sort of investigation, which was part of the Comey firing letter to begin with, when he said, "You told me, thank you for telling me 3 separate times that I'm not under investigation." Right,
insisting on that, and then telling the Russians that that was the case as well. But you know, and literally, that might be true. He might literally not be under investigation, whether Comey told him that or not. Then what we know about the investigation is they're looking at people in the Trump campaign, and now, based on this Washington Post report today, there's somebody in the White House as well that they're looking at, a senior advisor. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong here, and that doesn't mean the investigation is going to stop because Donald Trump isn't the literal target of the investigation at this point. And that doesn't mean that he won't be a target of the investigation as they move forward. So it's just curious, again, that if the original explanation for getting rid of Comey was not because of the Russia investigation, but was because of his job performance, and the very next day Trump is letting the Russian foreign minister know that the reason why he fired him was because of the Russia investigation. Very, very curious. Which makes the parsing of the president's language in this
availability with the leader of Colombia even more interesting yesterday, right? When he said, I can only speak, when he was asked about the collusion, and he said, I can only speak for myself, which seemed to be an advance or an evolution in his explanation of the collusion accusation. Well, it's right, because the investigation is looking at what connections people in the Trump campaign had to the Russian meddling in the election last year. And so they have not, as far as we know, discovered any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. But that's what they're investigating. And so it was interesting the way he said that, because he's been pretty stark in his terms on how he's described this investigation, not only calling it a witch hunt, but saying that he's not a target of the investigation. So for him, as you said, to say that yesterday was quite interesting. And now, so everyone begins the process, and one would believe that it may not take all that long to figure out who they're talking about here. Everyone tries to figure out exactly who this person of interest is, re the Washington Post report. Yes, the game of Sherlock Holmesing begins to try to figure out who this senior advisor is. We'll let you know when we find out, I'm sure. And in the meantime, the White House has a robust foreign trip, and the president is going to land here in less than 12 hours to visit 3 extraordinarily significant religious locations, followed by a NATO summit, followed by a G7 summit. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because they kept talking about how they're looking to this trip
to be really a way to step away from all the clouds of controversy that are here in Washington. And they talked a lot about how this is the theme is going to be unity. You mentioned the three places that are religious. So he's going to give a speech on Islam in Saudi Arabia. He's going to Israel. He's going to the Vatican to meet with the Pope. And so that was sort of what they want people to focus on. And there may be a bit of focus on that as he's there, because this is a pretty extraordinary trip. The amount of stops that he has in 9 days, it's a pretty grueling travel schedule, and there's going to be a lot happening. But that's not going to erase all of the controversy that's happening here in Washington. And, you know, just the fact that, 10 minutes after he gets on Air Force One to take off for his trip, we're getting 2 bombshell reports in the Washington Post and the New York Times, I think is an indication of how the story just is not going to go away, regardless of where the president is, whether he's in Washington or halfway around the world. And
so the question then is also who was inside the Oval Office and would be privy to this very select language the president used to describe James Comey. We don't know that because press wasn't invited in, other than someone from the Russian news agency.
Right. Apparently there were notes taken, and there was a document that summarized the meeting, and that's what the Times is using as their basis for the report. Now, I don't know, if it's an official document or if it was just somebody's notes, but that document was read to the New York Times, and that is the basis for the reporting on Trump calling Comey a nut job. That's his quote.
Well, it wasn't James Comey memorializing that, since he had been fired the previous day. But listen, Steve, I mean, this is, that's one of the quickly developing parts of this story is the notes that were taken by James Comey or others based on Oval Office conversations.
Well, that's right. And then the question is, based on Trump's tweet from last week, where he suggested there might be, quote, tapes of conversations that he's had with James Comey, and are there tapes? And will those tapes, if they exist, corroborate what is being said, what is being leaked here, or will they not? And the president, who's been asked about this, said he couldn't talk about it. Sean Spicer, who was asked about it, said he would not talk about the tapes. So we don't know if there are actually tapes that Trump is talking about. There's some suggestion. People who've had dealings with President Trump in his former career said, yeah, he tends to throw these threats around that he's taping things, but you get him under oath and he says there are no tapes. So we don't know what's going on in the White House, but that would add another layer of drama to this, because the Comey memo that you just mentioned, where it was suggested that Trump asked James Comey to let the investigation go into Michael Flynn, if there were tapes to corroborate that or to knock that down, I think people will want to know, especially the special counsel who's now doing an investigation into all of this.
Well, there may not be tapes, but it sounds like you can write, at this point, it would appear several books based on memos that were jotted down immediately following or during conversations that involved the president in the Oval Office. Steve Chaggaris in our D.C. bureau. Steve, thanks again.
Thanks, Jeff.